this is going to be weird, and it's going to be about a different.
Title of the conference was something like "Ground Truth" or "Turtles All the Way Down," and so it seems as though there's one rule ad. I don't think it rules them all, and it might be just hyper-rural turtles all the way down.
Yes, it's on the back of an infinite number of hyper-rural turtles.
Various people are commenting on the outrage of hacking the universe on a MacBook Air.
Hey guys, what's going on? Memes here, and I'm joined today by James Sirois.
Sirois.
Sirois. I completely butchered it. All right, 10 out of 10 for ruining your name. I apologize, sir. But James was one of the fellow total honorary mentions from Mr. Kurt Mungo. Shout out to Kurt's PACE 1, the Physics and Consciousness Exposition from this past year. And in that little clip, some may say a toe clipping if you want, that I did, it was when I appeared right as James was just starting to explain his thing there. And I'm like, that sounds like a fantabulous idea. So I went back, I listened to it. I listened to some of the other conversations you had with Daniel and Roy. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what it means, but it seems absolutely fascinating. So James, why don't you give the folks a little bit about the background of yourself and what got you interested in this all. Floor is yours, sir.
Okay, so the story, it really is one of those lifelong stories, actually. I recently pretty much, it's strange because as I live, as things develop, I keep discovering, and it becomes more and more clear what it is that my life is leading up to. It sounds kind of esoteric and wacky, but
I totally feel you on that. Continue.
Yeah. So that's what's great about this community. I think people accept kind of radically sounding things. So yeah, so things keep getting obscure and clear at the same time. Like anyway, so what got me? Okay, so my story is that I grew up. I was born in chaos, and I grew up in chaos, like literally chaos. I was never able to integrate into a community or into a program like sports, or I did cadets for a while. That was kind of stable when I was a kid. But basically, my mother moved around a lot. I moved from school to school, neighborhood to neighborhood, city to city, province to province, and now I've been living in different countries for the last few years. So that does something kind of interesting and has a lot of effects on a person. One of them is identity crisis, of course, and triggered some kind of self-defense mechanisms where if I felt that if I understood the world around me, then I would be able to harness some kind of power and just like have stability in my life, right? I could figure out
knowledge is power. Yeah. No, I feel you, man.
That's right. So that led me into an intense search for truth, and of course, because I wasn't able to integrate into any community, I was adapting to every community, and I kind of felt like I was a part of everything, but at the same time, you feel fractionated, you don't feel integrated. And so you question yourself as well. So you're not just questioning the world around you, you're questioning yourself. And that's a very philosophical endeavor, right? You're going down the road of metaphysics at some point. Because when you question, who am I? What am I doing here? What's the purpose of everything? You eventually ask the greatest philosophical question there is, which is, why is there something rather than nothing? And if you can't find a viable answer to that you accept, then you go on to the most important philosophical question there is, which is whether one should commit suicide, right? So, well, if I don't have an answer to any of this, well, should I continue living? So that
was a deep part, yes. Yeah, no, I remember that.
That's
the Memes of Destruction channel does not promote self-harm. Sorry about that. Just gonna cover our butts. You know how it is.
Yeah, that's true. I
totally that was very impactful in that. In when you were going over that, I'm like, that's a deep one, man. That's a deep one. But sorry, I cut you off.
It's cool, man. We play on the edge of things. It's very dangerous, but yeah, I'm totally good. I'm not depressed. I'm very happy to be alive, and there's no suicide here. So.
How did you? It sounds like this was kind of a long time coming, and kind of what spurred you? Had you been following Kurt's channel for a while, or what was going on there?
No, okay, so yeah, this has been a long time coming. Like I said, it's been a lifelong process, and so all of that culminated into a suicide attempt. So I did try at some point, but you know, like when you face death, that's what all our religions are about, really, and rituals and cults and stuff like that. It's metaphorical. It's a symbolism that behind it, right? When you face death for the first time, you are actually beginning to live for the first time. There's a duality there. So that's why a lot of people have, near death experiences, and then they change their entire lives and they're like super fulfilled and happy for the rest of their lives, because we're technically dead or sleeping in a way. We're walking around dead until we start to realize higher truths. So it's a death process. There's always a death process, and we go through multiple death processes throughout our lifetime. I think it's been quite well established in The Hero's Journey. I don't know if you know about Joseph Campbell. You ever read that guy?
I believe I've heard Professor Jordan Peterson mention him before, because that was what sparked my mind, because he had used the analogy like kind of like dead wood, like you're kind of like a tree and you're shedding off like your bark and your different layers stuff through that. But I do know some people that have been through it. Actually, one of my friends that about 20 years ago now, terrible car accident. We were in a horrific car accident. I ended up being fine. His brother-in-law ended up being fine, but it was one of those things where I looked at it. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to interject with a personal story here. I apologize, but I didn't have the situation. I'm not you. I haven't lived your life. But one of my friends at one point, we were young, we were dumb, and he got a brand new Camaro with a Grand Sport Corvette engine in and everything. And we had a couple of my friends, they were like, oh, whose car's, because my other buddy had the Porsche 951 Turbo and stuff, like, whose car is fast? I've been riding around that Camaro all day. I was going to get back in that Camaro, and then my big Greek buddy was like, ride with me. So we were riding, and then we ended up getting into this accident. And as that accident happened, I ran over to my buddy, and he was sitting there like with his head leaning out, and like blood was coming from like his ear and stuff. I'm like, oh my God. God bless. I shared a cell phone with my dad during the early days of cell phones. I called 911. The hospital was literally right around the street. They were there in less than 2 minutes. Saved his life. He ended up becoming a Marine, doing all these other things, completely changed his life. But I remember at that moment when I ran up to him, not knowing whether my friend was dead or alive, I noticed that the A pillar from the passenger side was basically right around the driver's side. I was going to get back into that car. Had I got back into that car, I would have been decapitated. So it was just, when you mention that, it's like one of those moments where it's crystallized in my memory. I would be dead had I done this one thing differently. But so that's why it really resonates with me when you say something like that can really change your perception of just like what's going on in the world. Hey, Whitechapel, thank you for joining us, my friend. But,
hey there, Whitechapel. But so if you really want to fry your noodle, that's just one variable that you were made aware of. Imagine all the other possibilities that happen day in, day out that you're unaware of that could have just killed you right there. So
we don't recognize. Well, that's the thing. Somebody was just saying, it's like you're just driving along and something, and somebody just like da da da, and it's like someone's like, they nearly ran into that 18-wheel truck there. Like, had that person not heavily hit on their brakes, that person was completely oblivious that would have been to the end of them and maybe their entire family. And that's
exactly.
Yeah. It engages the almonds, definitely. But yeah, you were saying. So, I'm sorry.
No, not a problem. It's good. I love anecdotes and real life experiences, and especially like. I mean, you seem to be that kind of guy where you make connections, and you're doing it very objectively, like it's without judgment. You just accept something that you find interesting, and you're saying, "Hey, how can I connect this to other things that I know?" Which I think is incredibly valuable. So I completely welcome it.
Just be careful with that, because some people like Tommy here, welcome Tommy, can tell you some of the connections I make can be very, very dangerous, especially if I put a clip montage up of some people. Yeah. Usually in a loving way, and occasionally some people earn it. I'm just saying.
Dangerous is necessary, man.
I'm not going to
It's
disagree with that.
inevitable.
This
I think
is
it's more
my
dangerous to shun danger, actually.
it's
But
that's the thing. It's just my personal opinion. It's pretty much just a miracle we're here. Just not even that I'm just talking to you. The sheer fact that we exist, because that kind of gets into your whole thing. It's like, why is there something rather than nothing? I have some ideas. I've talked with some smart people, but I want to know, what does James think? Why is there something rather than nothing?
so let me see if I can
In
create a
less
bit of
than
a
an infinite
segue.
amount of time. I'm sorry. No, continue.
No,
Wherever you
no,
want
no,
to
yeah.
go.
I won't take an infinite amount of time, but that's why I call it infinity limited. But we just to wrap up what we were talking about, Joseph Campbell, he wrote a book called the Hero's Journey, and he's a mythologist, so he studied many religions and cults. And anyway, he has a fantastic series where he was interviewed in like the late '80s or something, or in the '90s, and fantastic. You should watch it. Anyway, he talks about how all the stories that we're telling, it could be the Toe channel, right? Everyone's telling a similar story. It could be a movie that you're watching, that you watched when you were a kid. And every story that we tell, it could be a husband coming home from work and he tells his wife what happened. Ultimately, we're all telling the same story. So this is where Jordan Peterson, I think, was using Joseph Campbell, because he's explicating a lot of these stories that we've told, famous stories, whether it's from Disney or whatever. So those big movie franchises, and I'm in the film industry. I'm an actor. I'm a filmmaker as well. So it is pertinent to what I do. I do believe that stories are incredibly powerful, and we codify knowledge in our stories. So this guy understands that on a massive level, to the degree where he discovered that we're ultimately just telling one story. And what is that story? It's the hero's journey. It's the path that a human must take, and the major stops along the way are the changes that you go through, the cycle of a human being. So my cycle is basically, it seems, I think people like you and I, it's a little strange because our cycle tends to follow more along the lines of, I want to be very careful here, so I'm going to take a second. The journey that I look at when people, like philosophers, scientists, people who are curious about reality, Toe people, I think it's a little different because the cycle that we go through, although we do have normal cycle, meaning, okay, when we're teenagers, we go through existential crisis. When we're in our 20s, we realize, oh, fuck, I really should have listened to my parents, and so on, right? And, midlife crisis, and, becoming a parent, wanting to become, or when you become paternal or maternal or whatever. So all these little things that we go through as human beings, we go through them as well. But purpose for all that, like what drives us to actually move throughout that whole cycle, it's a very different when you are constantly living in order to understand life, right? And to not just understand it, but to communicate it to others once it's been understood, or what you believe is something you've understood. So it takes an incredible amount of humility. It makes you age. It makes you jump around in that cycle. I think necessarily you're not really following it that linearly, or that in a circular motion like everyone else. I think it's and not everyone has that. Like not everyone follows. Like sometimes when you're 12, like imagine a kid in Africa who's given an AK, right? And he says, "You shoot your mom in the head right now, or I kill your entire family right in front of you and you." Like that kid jumped from puberty zone to like you are a death machine. Like you're skipping all the puberty era stuff. They don't know that part of the
Destruction
cycle.
of innocence. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's different for everyone, and I seem to have fell through the cracks in many ways. Like a lot of people look at me, they say, there's a white cisgender oppressor patriarchal male who is probably a trust fund baby, and super rich and all that. And it's kind of funny because I'm telling you, every woman that I date keeps telling me, "Man, I thought you were a douchebag, but I meet you and like you're not a douchebag." Okay, well, that's great.
It's what people like me are for.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I appreciate you kind of giving me a bit of a platform there. You'd be surprised. Like, I grew up, with Africans in Toronto. I was discriminated against for my language and my race a little bit. I grew up, listening to rap. My friends were all black. We were poor. I was very, I grew up quite poor in Toronto, and so yeah, I mean, I really slipped through the cracks in many ways. Like, people don't realize just how non-typical or atypical my my life journey has been.
We're all more similar than we are different, but we do each have a unique life experience. That's the thing, and you can never discount that.
Exactly. So, like, it's true. Stereotypes exist. There are stereotypes. Stereotypes come from a place. There are truths to it. Like, if you say Asians typically eat rice, it's not racist. They do. I mean, it's in their environment. But at the same time, it's when you are faced with an individual, do you behave differently based on that stereotype? That's where I would say no. So we're mature enough to handle stereotypes. I mean, the culture war in our world, in the Western world anyway, has gone way too far with that stuff. It's like, nah, we do make judgments.
I played around in that way for a while, and then I would talk to people that were literally, I would have friends where like, I would listen to people literally have shouting matches and then argue about what George Washington's false teeth were made of. Ultimately, I believe at least there were some sets that were made from the teeth of perished people that were in bondage, and other set was made of rhinoceros ivory. But I'm sitting there, I'm like, you just spent 2 hours arguing over what George Washington's teeth. And then I've spoken to both these individuals. I'm like, let me approach this like you said. Am I going to treat somebody like a stereotype? Like, this person was yelling at somebody I liked. I'm like, let me use respect. Hello, sir, and everything. And ultimately, it came down to, unfortunately, I think far too often, and not all cases, but I think some people just don't like other people, and then they'll kind of just ratchet on to another angle of attack and just stress that rather than necessarily always believe. And don't get me wrong, if somebody passionately believes something, I totally can respect them for having their convictions or anything. I might disagree with them, but I can respect a person with convictions to an extent. My thing comes down to, it's like, now, do you actually believe that, or are you just doing that to get one up on the other person? That's why I did the culture war for a while. It felt like it was draining my soul. And then I I found a solution. It's a terrible solution. I'm like, let's just legalize dueling. Let's just have the people that truly believe it, that are true believers, that are willing to die for their cause, or at least they act like it on the internet. Let's give them exactly what my thing is. If you're going to call the person you disagree with evil for just disagreeing with you, at that point, you're just going to breed so much negativity and everything. I look at the incentive system. If you modify an incentive system, sure, but it's like, you just pick a side, doesn't matter side, say a whole lot of good things about people that people on one side like, and say a whole lot of, I'm like, this is a terrible system. Legalize duel. And then science was my safe space. So I started hearing about theories of everything and stuff. I found Dr. Eric Weinstein on the Joe Rogan Experience. I found Professor Keating, found PBS Space-Time, and through the loops, the Wolfram Research and everything. I'm like, oh, Kurt's got an entire channel to this. I'm like, all right, these are my people. So I'm like, all right, let me jump in with this toast stuff, and hey, we'll see what happens. Maybe we'll save the world or something.
Well, precisely it. It's quite important what we're doing, and just so we kind of focus, I think people might be taking the last few minutes as decoherence, but the reason I'm sharing more personal stories about identity and how people perceive each other and the culture war and all that, it's all relevant to TOES. There's a reason there's pressure for us to understand our reality now, because things are moving very quickly or changing very quickly, and it's all tied to storytelling, identity, the ability to be objective and open-minded, all that stuff. So I just wanted to kind of recenter everything and explain why I was talking about all that, because it might not seem relevant, but it is. It's incredibly relevant. We're talking about theories of everything, but then the question is why? Why are we here to be talking about theories of everything, and why not before? Or why wasn't the general public that interested before? And why are they more interested now? Why is everyone saying, oh, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual? There's so much that's pointing towards higher understanding and a sort of singularity that's approaching, of more communication happening between people, and higher awareness arising. Now, is it going to destroy us, or is it going to help us evolve? Who knows? But I think what we're doing is very important to continue that balance, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, cool.
So
Now, no, and thank you for recentering us, because I will get off into a bajillion different tangents, going in a bajillion different ways. Like Kurt had something on earlier. I forget the gentleman's name. Some very powerful, like, doctor of mathematics or something. And at one point, I just heard Grossendiek, and it reminds me of a quote that Jonathan Gorod had at was it the Wolfram Summer School over this past year. At one point, it came up in the 2-hour conversation with him, Professor Wolfram, and Grossendiek, and he was like part-time wizard. Because basically he had something called like topos and stuff, and it's kind of like, I think that's how they within mathematics they eventually transform that into kind of like what they call like the infinity groupoid. It's like, all right, here's this thing, but it has all the sets, it has all the categories and everything. If we can map this, but that's infinite. How do we do that? And it sounds like you're trying to find a balance of how do we try to conceptualize infinity? Because I also have on those screens, and I'll bring it up here. You have, what is it, the infinity limited equation?
yeah.
Do you want to get into that now, or give that for later?
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay,
you just said it, balance, and the thing is, it's not to create balance; it's to realize it. And also, I think here's the thing. You're just talking about this fellow Grossendyke. I'm not sure. In any case, there seems to be a bifurcation in the TOE community, whereas you have those who are physics based, and then you have those who are consciousness based, and maybe something in between. But either way, you could look at that from another perspective and say, okay, simplicity and complexity. And what I do is, my theory is all about compatibility. How is everything compatible, no matter how radically contradictory it is, because it all exists. Those points of view exist. Therefore, they must be compatible on the highest level of abstraction or reality. So how do you access that compatibility? How do you understand that everything is compatible, no matter how incompatible it may appear to us? And this is what paradoxism is about. So the infinity limited is just the name to the equation that emerged out of my philosophy, but the philosophy is called paradoxism. And I observe, and so this is why, like right now with Roy and I, like Roy is on the simple side. We created a new theory, the three of us as well.
The triune?
The triune system, yeah. So basically it's called unity theory. And I realized that because there's this debate, right? You have guys like Kurt and everyone else, like E8 and geometric unity and all that. It's super complex, and there might be some truth to it, but at the same time, there's just dark spots, we don't understand it. And then you have the super simple, which doesn't tell you very much because it's too simple, and it's like, okay, you could just sit there and do nothing. That's great, but we want to understand why it's possible to do nothing, or why. And so what paradoxism does is it doesn't create the balance. You're just observing, and with the ability to observe your own experience of what a paradox is, you start to realize how everything is compatible. So there is this perfect balance that emerges between simplicity and complexity as well. And this is why I think most people probably don't understand, because it's incredibly simple. My philosophy is that there are no paradoxes. But then here's how the human mind works. If you tell them it's a certain truth, they're going to be like, it doesn't matter how true it is, right? If it's so direct, they have all the evidence, it's very simple and everything, then they're going to say, how do I know that's true? Like, prove that truth, even if you give them the fundamental truth. And so ultimately, you do need a loop or a sort of process that can take them through the complexity and lead them back to the simplicity. And then they can see that they just went through a loop, if the loop is small enough. But if you're going to go through mathematics and theoretical physics and all that, and you go through all this complexity, you're going to take one long life cycle to realize that you're in a loop. So paradoxism really does that. Out of it emerges the transcendental understanding that ultimate reality is paradoxical, but doesn't mean that it's a failure of human understanding or that there's a contradiction at the base of reality. In fact, there is no contradiction. And there is. Why? Because you are the one who perceives it that way. So that's just a little bit of a introduction, but if you want me to go into the actual equation, I can if you'd like.
So is this why it apparently? Are you saying that a 300-page proof to prove that 1 + 1 = 2 might lose a few people?
Well said. Very eloquent. That's it.
Yeah, let's jump in. No, go on, and we'll jump into the equation
But
after.
you're right. It'll lose most people. But at the same time, there are some people who need that. They say, I want the logical proof for this. And what paradoxism does is it affords both simplicity and complexity. And so, yeah, I can put you through the thought experiment if you'd like.
I'm almost wondering now if I took a look at that 300-page proof, if there was a loop in there somewhere. Because if you go back to, was it Gödel's theorem or something like that, where if you believe the rules of the system are true and you're trying to prove things within the system, ultimately your faith in the rules is basically you need something almost outside of the system in order to prove that the system you are within is true. I'm getting some of those vibes there, and it sounds like you're trying to shoot towards a method of reconciliation. Or before the stream was kind of like, I know Professor Wolfram has been conceptualizing this whole symbolic discourse language. Like, what are we actually talking about? Because we all use different words, and sometimes we'll use words because maybe we grew up and maybe I heard my parents use these words. So these are technically the words we use, but it's like, no, in a different context, maybe different culture, we use very different words, or these words are used similarly, but there's different contexts. There's formal, there's informal, there's different modes there.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's do the thought experiment.
You're absolutely right, but I think I'm just gonna plug my laptop in before I start because I realize it's not lasting as long as it.
Oh no worries. I have totally done that before. I'm like, why can I not render a high definition video? I'm like, oh, my computer wasn't plugged in, and it's at like 3%. So that's totally fine.
So what you just said, like you need to go outside the system to describe the system, but as soon as you go outside, when you're talking about existence, you're talking about creating another existential framework, whether it's spatial temporal, right? Like it's outside the space-time construct. You're still creating a space or something that is existential. Like George Ellis, he's a famous theoretical physicist from South Africa who has a theory called possibility spaces that are supra-physical. It has nothing to do with I guess space-time, but it's still an existential thing. Like that's why I cut right to the chase and I say we're dealing with infinity here. I mean, and so how do you get outside of infinity? You don't. So you have to work within it in a way. But and so I was in contact with Robert Lawrence Kuhn. I don't know if you know. He's got a show called Closer to Truth.
Closer to Truth. Yeah. No, it's a fascinating guest.
Super great guy, and he was friendly. I had messaged, like I just found his email on his website. I was in Greece, and he actually responded back. I was like, oh, I'd like to ask Robert Kuhn a question if possible, and he's like, yeah, man. Like he just started talking to me. It was cool. Anyway, he gave me a piece that he wrote called "The 9 Levels of Nothingness," because it's true, right? People say, okay, what is nothingness? Well, they'll remove space-time, but then they'll still have information or possibilities or whatever, and that's still existential. Like existence is so comprehensive, it's ecumenical, right? So even nothingness, void, in a way, you could consider that to be an existential thing if you define it that way. So ultimately, the semantics can get really complicated. Like you said, we have used different words and different meanings for these words. So I've devised a thought experiment. I came up with a new question that I don't think anyone's asked before, and I'll put you through it now.
Okay.
So the question usually that people ask is like, where did existence come from, or how does it emerge? What is nothingness, right? Why is there something rather than nothing? And to me, I was wondering, like, wait, does it have to be something or nothing? I came up with this new question. Does existence and non-existence coexist? Are they both there somehow? And that's massively paradoxical. And this paradox is got a name. It's called an antinomy. Comes from the Greek anti-nomos, against the law. So it's against the law of our logic, but on the highest level of abstraction, the highest or the fundamental basis for reality, it doesn't. I mean, it's what generates that law. It's what generates that logic. It generates its own. It follows a higher paradoxical logic, and so I asked myself that question, like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, what are the possible answers? Can existence and non-existence coexist? Right? And first, you have to define every term that you use if you really want people to understand. I didn't do that very well in the video. I should have. But like existence to me is what Robert Kuhn says. If you want to define existence, you just have to read the 9 levels of nothingness. So by contrast, you start to understand what existence is. It includes information. It includes the possibility to think about information. It includes consciousness, everything that existence can be.
Oh, no. I think, again, I have not done as much reading as I should, but I do think Professor Hossenfelder, she did a video on like what is actually nothing and stuff. I do believe she actually referred to the 9 levels of nothingness, and she was like, okay, it's pretty good, but she kept on saying, it's like, okay, let's take away matter. Oh, but there's still float. Okay, let's take away the bosons. It's like, oh, we got the vacuum is still stuff and everything, and you keep removing. It's like there's a lot of stuff that we kind of don't even really consider on a fairly frequent and regular basis. That's fascinating.
It's all existential. It's all part of existence. So the question is not existence. The question is nothingness. That's the thing we can't wrap our heads around because you're always thinking about it. So you're generating nothingness almost when you think about it. And yet, can you consider it true void because it's a thought? It's encapsulated in a thought. This gets very philosophical real quick. So I'll just continue in the thought experiment. We can debate that a bit later. But so can existence and non-existence coexist? What are the typical answers that come up? Well, the first one is, in fact, all there is existence. Like there is no nothingness. And this is typically the material reductionist view, or the physicists, or the atheists, or whatever, the scientific view, because they work with matter.
We're dealing with stuff that exists to our knowledge.
Exactly. So typically the answer is it makes no sense to ask that question, and they just accept that existence is infinite, and that's it. So it's an infinity of existence. And then the second answer is the more esoteric Buddhistic view, and it's that in fact all there is nothingness. Like this is all illusory. There is no matter or physics. Or it's all like a dream.
This is where definitions are important. I see what you're doing. Yes. Okay, continue.
So, if everything is like, if it's all nothingness, like void, it would not have any limitations, right? So to me, the way I define void or nothingness is that it would have no definition, no defined parameters, no nothing. It can't be limited. It would also be infinite, right? So in fact, it's an infinity of nothingness. Great. Then the third possible answer is, well, they somehow coexist. Like if you go to the edge of space and time, is it possible to look behind you and there's like nothingness? That it wouldn't, that it's recursive in a way, right? But at the same time, this is where everything converges into consciousness, because we have a concept of nothingness and void and infinity. Why are we aware of these things? Why can we generate these thoughts? That's a massive question that people always, it's like they look at infinity or they look at consciousness and they're like, okay, those questions don't make sense. But yet you're aware of it. Why is it? So here's what's special about human beings. The difference between animals and higher consciousness like us and humans is we're aware of our mortality. We're aware of like time, so past, present, and future. And we're aware of, our mortality. And of course, we're aware of existence. We're aware of our own existence. We're self-aware to begin with. So we totally accept those things. Those are like a given. There's no need to doubt those things, right? But when it comes to infinity or zero, There's a book you got to read, Zero, the biography of a dangerous idea, where this guy totally explains how zero in mathematics and infinity in physics are completely used. They have no choice to use it, and yet at the same time, no one ever touches it or defines it, and they try to escape it as much as possible. They build this whole structure on top of something they don't want to go near. And Cantor did go near it, right? With its incompleteness theorem. So, oh no, that was Gödel, sorry. But Cantor with the sets of Gödel with incompleteness theorem, but it started off with Cantor's in infinities, right? Yeah, so that book, exactly.
Cool.
Read that, it'll knock you on your ass. So I do look at zero and infinity and consciousness, because those are the three things that people can never wrap their heads around. So how do you do it? When you think about those things, they're paradoxical. So I was trying to observe, okay, well, let's observe the paradox then. What is a paradox? Does it mean that something is false? Does it mean that it's true? Does it mean it's both? What is it? So ultimately, the thought experiment goes like this. Does existence and non-existence coexist? 1, it's an infinity of existence. 2, it's an infinity of nothingness. Or 3, it's an infinity of both. And then I realized, before I wanted to choose an answer, I realized there was a constant throughout. And it didn't matter which answer that you fucking choose, because infinity exists. Either way, existence can't be limited. Doesn't make any sense for it to have any limitations. Where would it be? And if it was limited, wouldn't that be where nothingness begins? So if you subscribe to just existence, it's an infinity of existence for sure. It's an infinity. You have infinity. If it's nothingness, well, nothingness can't have a limitation because it doesn't exist to begin with, logically. Therefore, it's infinite. It's infinite as well. And an infinity of both, of course. So infinity is the absolute truth. This is no one can argue with it. And who would want? And how could you? You would just have to say, I argue with it because I'm an asshole. Because I want to. That's it.
I have to show part of my hand here. I am totally biased. When I was 10 years old, I remember all these ideas. I'm like, I'm going to write the Book of Infinity. And I got a blue notebook because blue is the best flavor. And I wrote the Book of Infinity, and I never wrote anything in it. So circumvent like I had like 20 quarter century or so later. It's like, all right, now we have technology. Let me actually try to start doing things useful. At least get my ideas out there. And you know what? Hey, most of my ideas, they're probably wrong. Most ideas typically are wrong. But if that sparks that little bit of knowledge in someone else, and I know you mentioned this in your videos and stuff, if this gets somebody, their noggin a jog and gives them that one little extra piece, that one little extra idea, it's like, oh, I didn't think about it in this particular method before. And all of a sudden click, and all of a sudden they do something amazing. It's like, dude, we're all entangled here. And you are a brave man, James, because you are literally trying to solve one of the oldest paradoxes there are. Because it has been theorized that
it's turtles all the way down.
That's why I like StreamYards. But I have so many clips. But well, that's the thing. It was and apparently that Professor Wolfram at one point did actually explain where that came from. I think it was at like a World Science Festival in probably like the 50s or 60s. And there was some big name physicist, I don't remember their name, and they're like, well, how is it here? It's like, well, no, it exists. The world's on top of a giant turtle. It's like, what's that turtle on top of? Another turtle. And what's that turtle on top of? And she's like, no, you don't understand. It's turtles all the way down. And that apparently became a meme that has persisted within the greater physics community so long that at one point I was doing a video on like black holes and certain coordinates and stuff. And at one point I'm looking through the Wikipedia article. I'm like, the tortoise coordinate, apparently at some scale of a black hole, it's proposed that there's a coordinate called the tortoise coordinate. And I look at the exponentiation, I'm like, that looks like a shell. It was so I have no idea what it means, but I look at it, I'm like, well played, physics community, well played. But and again, this is why I think your work is so important here, because it's like, what are we all talking about? If we can actually have like symbolic discourse on agreed upon definitions, because very often people will just say words, and you'll notice, like, especially if you're an outside observer and you see like even on like the Tonanza and stuff that Kurt had, some people and some folks, they kind of think that they heard something, or not even on the Tonanza, but it's like, I've observed enough folks where it's like, I heard somebody something and this person took it a particular way, But I'm pretty sure since I'm not actively there, I can just go back 30 seconds and be like, no, they said this. You interpreted it as this. And now this leads to conflict and people getting all angry and something. And occasionally I'll message somebody privately, like, you do realize that's not what they actually said. And then people are embarrassed. They don't want to have to apologize or take things back because of the internet and whatever. I don't know.
Exactly.
This is why I like the science and the.
That's precisely why your work is important, because like you are pushing people to, with a simple question like, hey, you're falling into that trap of semantics here, and you're talking past each other. You never even had to. All you had to do is define the mutual term, have a consensus over the term, over the keyword. It's amazing. I teach philosophy, right, to kids and critical thought and stuff, and it's like amazing how adults, even in their late 50s and 60s, still make that very elementary mistake to like not define the key word, and they're never able to communicate properly. And it's so simple. It's just define it, understand what the difference is between the two definitions that you have, try to find a compromise over it if you need to, but it's the basic stuff. We always just go operate with our definition, and then we don't realize, oh, okay, well, all we had to do is do that, and then we can move forward. But yeah. So
well, I think there was. Sorry to cut you off, but it was. I think there was something in, and I'm sure this has happened all throughout the age of humanity. But I think there was something back in like the Middle Ages or something. It was about restating your opponent's, basically argument. Like if you're having a debate with somebody, it was literally. I think it was on maybe Missing the Marks channel. It's he does like some philosophy and some religious stuff over there. Shout out to Christopher. It's Christopher. I still remember his name, but. One of the things he would get into, it's literally so what you're saying is meme. It's literally you like, so what you're saying is, and you restate it in your own words so that you're literally on the same territory. I feel like some people, at least when I was growing up in class, very often a teacher would say, do you have any questions? And I had no idea what was going on. I wanted to ask a question, but I was embarrassed to ask a question because I didn't feel like looking like I was dumb. But then I talked to all these people and they're like, oh my God, I had the exact same question or something like that. It's like, I feel like I'm not alone in this. I feel like sometimes people get a little embarrassed because maybe they don't want to ask a question or something like that. And I feel like one of the reasons why I know like this, you're really serious about this is you spend time thinking about the appropriate question. And that in and of itself, I think, what was it? I think at one point somebody asked Einstein, it's like, Professor Einstein, if you had somebody gave you a problem and you had 1 hour to solve it, but and then the world would be destroyed if you weren't able to solve it in an hour, how would you go about it? And he very calmly responded something along the lines of, it would take 55 minutes to properly generate the correct question and 5 minutes solving it.
Yeah, exactly.
Questions are powerful.
That's what it is. It is powerful. That's exactly like something came to me a few years ago. And it's like a maxim that I live my life by. It just kind of emerged in my mind. I was thinking like, I know what? Answers are just better questions waiting to be asked. And I've lived my life that way ever since.
Answers are better questions waiting to. Oh.
Yeah.
That's
so once you find an answer,
wrap my round around. Okay, go on.
It's the problem of infinite regress. Once you have an answer, then you have to ask, well, why that answer, right? Like if you say, okay, cool, we found the Higgs boson. All right, well, where from? It's like, if you say the answer is God or it turtles all the way down or whatever, then you have to ask how. It's infinitely regressive. So ultimately, an answer is just another question to be asked, and it's a better question, right? A more interesting one. It's the infinite regress thing. That's all.
Oh, it's a different, dude. How can be very difficult, and then you might jump up to the last W question. Why?
Yeah,
and that is something that that's why it's like, hey, power to you guys for the consciousness stuff and everything. Let me play around with some numbers and Wolfram Alpha and everything. The consciousness thing, I'll take a poke in the dark here and there. I'll try to come up with an adage, but it's like, I kind of, it's like you said, I'm kind of one of those other people over here. It's like, occasionally my brain explodes when I start to go through the infinite regress. Like you said, it's like, all right, so I'm like, okay, aside from what it's alive, it's like, well, what is conscious? Okay, okay. So let's suppose I was like a particle or something like that. Well, a particle responds to this and everything. It's like, okay, typically principle of least action, or at least many people say that. I'm like, well, I kind of follow the principle of least action and stuff as well. If I'm going downhill, I tend to get more velocity and everything. And then I notice if I'm listening to like some music and I'm out for a jog and I'm kind of tired, I'm usually pretty stable because I'm in a harmonic rhythm. But if all of a sudden I'm listening to like a Wolfram Physics Project thing and they're talking about all these big equations or something like that, all of a sudden if I'm listening and trying to process that, I'm overloading my total computation of my body. I often fall. And I literally will think about that. I'm like, I'm probably going to fall doing this often during a phase transition where I'm like adjusting the volume or something. I'm like, wait, is that different than like a neutron decaying or a particle being perturbed by somebody else? And then my mind's like, oh dear God. That's why if I'm going to talk about consciousness, I literally have to say panpsychism aside, because it can be a hard thing to argue against, man. I'm just like, I'm not going to say I'm necessarily a dualist, but I'm like, it would explain a lot. I'm not going to say that. Go on.
It's great. It's a great segue. You know what kick-started the book that I'm writing? It's called Infinity Limited, the book as well. It was a philosopher emeritus, professor emeritus at the Trinity College in Dublin. I was living in Berlin at the time, and across my Facebook newsfeed, I get this article from the Irish Times, and it had to do with this philosopher who created a survey that helps you determine if you are a monist or a dualist. And he had extrapolated from dead philosophers of the past based on their beliefs and stuff. He categorized which ones were monists, which ones were dualists. I found his email address and I sent him an email with the title, "I'm a monist about dualism." And it caught his attention. He sent me the survey. I took the survey and he came back with a response telling me I fit into a third category that he had omitted from the survey. And it's this, yeah, which is both. It's paradoxical, both monism and dualism. And he said that this is super rare, and that Spinoza was one of those. And that's what kickstarted the book that I'm writing. He said you should write a book. He's in his like 80s. He's still writing books. He's amazing, really cool guy. And he's a Berkeleyan, so he studies Berkeley. George Berkeley, the bishop in Ireland, philosopher guy. He's the one who came up with the maxim esse est percipi, which is to be perceived, the grand perceiver of everything. It's consciousness-based theory anyway. So yeah, really interesting stuff. I just wanted to mention that out of nowhere because you talked about dualism. And so
that is fantastic. And even what you just said, again, I'm cutting you off, James. I'm sorry. But
go ahead, please.
The sheer fact that it's like, because I had a similar experience, because a lot of times folks are like, well, how do we go about things? I want to talk to these people. I don't know how. I'm only a channel or something like that. Or it's like, I don't have all these published works and academic accreditations and stuff. Sometimes it's just half the battle showing up. You're just going onto a paper and just be like, oh, okay, somebody's email address is there. Let me shoot an email. Don't be like, oh my God, this person needs to, because the person doesn't owe you anything. They don't know you. You're a stranger. But especially if you have something that's maybe a little entertaining, showed that you've engaged with their work or something like that, you never know. I mean, that's how I got Jonathan Gorad on at one point and everything. I'm like, oh, just go to some of his work. I've seen him there on some other channels. I just reached out. He's like, yeah, sure. When we get a time, we can totally do that. And that's half the battle, is just really just reaching out and everything. And not everyone's going to say yes. I mean, personally, I also came from a sales background. So it's like, I'm getting used to told no a lot by a lot of people, statistically far more people than say yes. So it's like, okay, nothing venture, nothing gain, but you just got to find your groove.
And that's, I think it's exactly right. Like you said, half the battle is showing up. If you have the desire to do it, it's almost like a responsibility. You should do it if that's what your impulse is. Communication. I believe in communication in a big way. It's very, very deep. I don't want to go off on it right now, but to address what Whitechapel, what he says here, the how, when, where, and why of the problem and the answer. This is what I've been focusing on. I'm interested in physics, quantum mechanics, philosophy, morality, all that stuff. I love it. It's all great. I love to think about it. But But at the same time, it doesn't matter if you can't do what Whitechapel is talking about here. And that's why I try to stay as clean as possible, pure logic. Now, someone can always dispute the logic, and that's fine. But that's part of the system. If you use paradoxical logic, then even if someone says, prove it logically. And that's the beauty of it. Paradoxical logic does prove like logic itself, right?
It has to loop back around, doesn't it?
Yeah, and so and it's simple. It's by observing the experience of a paradox in your consciousness. All right, and there's four types, three or four types of paradoxes, and we're talking about two here, specifically two that are very special, because there are paradoxes that really do indicate a failure of human reasoning. It's just you think it doesn't make sense, or somehow it loops and it's contradictory. And in fact, you were just missing a piece of information or a perspective, and then you realize, oh, there is no paradox, it's straightforward logic. Then you have, that's called a falsidical paradox. Then you have veridical paradoxes, which is that you have found proof physically, somehow, like the scientific method, that it just is paradoxical. It contradicts itself in physics. So that would be like a black hole where information breaks down. And until someone finds out that it's a falsidical paradox, and in fact, we discovered that it wasn't. But so far, vertical paradoxes seem to be real. And then you have antinomy, which is something that emerges next to its own negation. That's what existence, like coexistence theory, that's what it's all based on. It's the grand antinomy, the great paradox, that existence and nothingness are, it's what actually, in fact, it's not even me. I realized this, that we've understood this for thousands of years. We have. In Hinduism and the ancient Greeks, the ancient Gnostics had a concept called the pleroma. And Carl Jung reiterated that in his, it's called The Seven Sermons to the Dead. It's a 12-page article or piece that he wrote. Very, very interesting. And it describes what the pleroma is, the fullness. And so I just, if everyone has access to the same reality. So if you look hard enough, you'll follow on to the same thing that thousands of years ago we figured out already. It's just that people got stuck in like the material reductionism. They're like, no, we got to prove it. It's like, okay, great. And maybe no one's ever proved it logically. No one's given it a logical or symbolic description. No, we've done symbolic descriptions like crazy. All the religions do it. But can we come up with a clean, logical description of it, of the pleroma? And Carl Jung did it really well. But he didn't tackle, I don't think, how you can achieve that enlightenment through a process, conscious process. And so that's what it is. That's what the infinity limited equation is. It is observing the paradox that occurs as an experience in consciousness. So consciousness is so axiomatic to everything. People are looking around like, what is consciousness? Does it emerge out of a physical substrate or and yet it does, but at the same time it's paradoxical because itself can impact the physical substrate. So is it non-physical? It's both. What the fuck, right? And the truth is, like, that doesn't need, it's kind of like asking someone, it's asking the wrong question, right? And in a sense, would you ask your own eyeball to look at itself? I mean, that's not its function. The point is to see everything else. That's how axiomatic consciousness is. So it's the wrong question to ask. But at the same time, you can ask it. It seems to be that that's what consciousness does. It kind of projects outward and experiences itself and sees itself, Anyway, then I'm getting a bit too far, but let me take you through the paradoxes a little bit more so that you understand what I'm talking about. So we said veridical, falsidical, antinomy, which is something that exists only through its negation, only through what can destroy it or cancels it out in a way.
Oh, we're sounding almost mathematical here. We're going negation, induction, and stuff. Continue, sir.
It is mathematical. In fact, it's the simplest math. It's a superposition.
It's logic.
Everything is, it's logic. It's a superposition. So 0 and 1. It's in fact 0, 1. We see it in quantum mechanics. Anyway, the point is, then you have dialetheia, which is Greek for two truths. And that basically is a special type of paradox that people don't believe is possible because it has something to do within the existential construct. For example, can my hand be here and not here at the same time? No, like if I place an object Like, can two objects occupy the same space? Like, can my ring here? I have another ring. Can this ring occupy the same space as this ring?
According to the Fermi exclusion principle, it's not supposed to have. I get what you're saying. I could make some snide remarks, say, "Well, I can see your hand there, but I know it's not actually there because I'm just watching on a screen through my sunglasses." But no, I get you. You had a really good example in your video. What was it? Absolute truths. Something about there is an absolute truth, or no, there are no absolute truths. But assuming that's an absolute truth ends up being a paradox within itself. That resonated with me. I'm like, ooh, this man's playing with fire.
That's an antinomy, though, because
truth going the wrong way.
Truth can only emerge next to its negation in that one. But the dialetheia is a physical thing, and it's very important because now you have an antinomy, which gives rise to existence or gives rise to our experience. But then you have to understand the existential construct itself, and so how does the existential construct exist alongside nothingness? Well, you look at the dialetheia, which is that can two objects occupy the same space? No. But when you're talking, because existence or the space-time construct at the very least follows that set of logical rules. But the supra-physical construct or non-construct, whatever you want to call it, that's where it's paradoxical. When you're talking about existence itself, can it exist and not exist at the same time? That is a very special type of dialetheia. In fact, and so that's where I realized that, okay, you necessarily have to have two parallel questions or two parallel entries into understanding reality completely. Of course. Why two? Because humans are beings of differentiation, contrast, duality, right? If you want to reach the monism, the one substrate, the one truth, the one whatever, you necessarily have to do it through duality. And that's what's paradoxical because, well, it isn't one thing. It is one thing. It isn't two things. But yet you only have the mechanism of seeing things through duality to see that one thing. So what I'm doing is helping people go through that loop fast enough, really quickly, so that they realize, my duality is only possible through the monism, through the substrate. That is like the duality itself is the monism. It's both. It's paradoxical within. So the paradoxes itself also fall into infinite regress. But at the very least, in your consciousness, it will launch you. Your experience of that will launch you into a higher understanding of and an acceptance or a higher view, third eye kind of thing of the monism and how everything functions through duality, right? It's like an infinite timeline. It's kind of like take a line. On any point on that line, you can create parameters. So it's a series of beginnings and endings that itself has no beginning and ending, right? And that's all you have to see you have to have that experience in your consciousness. It's something that is experienced, which is why people meditate. And you have plenty of people who've known this throughout history, but they sit there on the mountain and they never give a fuck about explaining it to the world or having a mechanism that can bring people into it logically. So it's kind of like the Aikido, right? Like you use, instead of resisting someone's blow, you just continue their direction. So you want to go that way? Let's go that way. Cool. We'll go that way and I'll show you. Right? That's what paradoxism does in a way. So here's the kicker. Here's how we're getting really at the core here. What is an experience of a paradox when you're talking about the aletheia and antinomy? We know that these are true, even though they are untrue at the same time. It's just, we know that these paradoxes have to exist. Zero has to, it's necessary. It has nothing to do with true or untrue. It just is necessary. It's like Russell said, Bertrand Russell, right? I should not wonder about the contingency of existence. I should just say that it's there and that's that. It's a blatant fact, right? So ultimately, there is
to say something that's not real that we use all the time. I don't know. That seems pretty real.
Yeah. Well, real or not doesn't matter on the highest level of abstraction, but you'll only realize that once you've crossed over and understood it as an experience in human consciousness. That's the trick. Like people say you need the leap of faith. Absolutely. But can you take a leap of faith, Kierkegaard's leap of faith, in a way that once you've taken that leap, you look back and you realize, oh, I don't need faith anymore because I fucking understand. Like I have the proof in my hands or in my consciousness. That's what's trippy about it. It's kind of like, it's you need the leap of faith once And once you're in it, once you're enlightened, there's no more faith required. Faith makes no sense. So
you're
this
giving
is
me
why people
Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade vibes right now. I like it.
Yes, well, I'm literally in Colombia. This is like so many expats come here and like people to do ayahuasca and like experience ego death and the truth of everything. And ultimately, a lot of people here do understand that stuff. They really do. They've understood reality on the highest level of abstraction. But I for some reason have gone through another road that I didn't need to take ayahuasca for, I guess.
We all have our own path. Okay. So in
So
order to help me, go on, finish your thought.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, because I want to get to the core of
no,
everything.
I was just saying, is this table here kind of what you were saying, just to give the folks a little bit more visuals? It's actually just to give me some idea, because it kind of sounds like you have the balance here in that we have the infinity, and then you have that last part, and then everything on the inside was set parallel to, which was I believe, the infinity limited equation. Should I go to the equation first or this first?
So we'll have to. I'll give you a bit of an explanation first. Okay. What occurred first was paradoxism. Okay. The idea that you can use duality as a tool to understand things, because what is a paradox? It is two things that are connected, right? Which makes it one thing finally, and yet it's two at the same time, right? So that mechanism helps you understand things like insanely well. And then out of that occurred the infinity limited equation, which is just a physical way to see reality in an equation. And then afterwards, once I realized that that's still not the full theory, because it doesn't explain how things emerge, like how the physics emerge and all that. So that's when I met Daniel and Roy.
That's when Daniel's jumping continuity theory, because I had spoken with him, and it is a fascinating thing.
Exactly. He's going into the actual physics of it, and Roy is sitting in the nothingness, in like the pure potential of chaos. And I just make the two compatible through paradoxism. But the point is, before we get into any of that, you need an epistemological proof. Of course, always go back to proof. People will say, okay, that's great. Paradoxes are a way to understand truth, but how do you know the paradoxes? How do you know your consciousness is a viable tool for truth, right? So here's how that works. An experience in your consciousness, when you're talking about an antinomy, when you think about infinity, for example, you get this weird experience. It's an experience. You're like, okay, it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. What does that mean? That's the reason that happens, is because we are limited beings. That's the limited part, right? We can only like when you perceive information, right? You perceive distance. Let's say I'm looking at a mountain right in front of me, and there's mountains beyond it, and it goes forever. And I don't know if it goes on forever, but I can't use my sight. I cannot channel enough information or perceive enough to prove that infinity goes on for infinity. So all I have is a limited amount of information. That's great. But consciousness, because it is at the root of everything, right? And that's where you need the faith at first. You'll only understand that you are really consciousness. You are God, what I call the universal self. You really are everything, and you are at the same time, it's paradoxical, a limited being in, and not just beings, all matter, all things, are infused with this consciousness. So like I'm looking at me right now, and you're looking at yourself, right? It's like we're all the universal self and the limited self at the same time. So the point is, you have to take that leap of faith of understanding, okay, because we have the awareness of infinity, it must exist. But how will I prove it to myself? This is how you prove it to yourself. You realize that perception is limited and conception is unlimited. We have the ability to conceive. And so the paradox is really just the barrier. It's the boundary where human perception ends, because you can't possibly perceive all of infinity, but where your conception begins, which is the idea that infinity goes on forever. It's very simple. There's nothing to understand. We already understand it. Zero, or a circle. And that's what Galileo did, right? He drew a triangle, 3 sides. Then he drew a square. He added another side, and he kept drawing shapes. And then he realized that a circle is a geometric shape with an infinite amount of sides. There it is, 0, a circle. It's in the mandala. It's the most recognizable human universal symbol on the planet. We understand infinity. We know it's not a problem. So there's nothing to argue about.
My circle
Right? We
had
just don't
one
understand
side.
how to understand it. Sorry, go ahead.
I thought a circle had one side, or I'm sorry, I always get those parts.
One,
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. I'm sorry, I'm
or
pedantic.
infinity. But here's the beauty of it. It's both. 1 and infinity are the same. And 0 as well. It's all, if you're talking about finding the truth, one thing, right? Then there is no discrimination. On the highest level of abstraction, there are no distinctions between things, not even one. The only way to understand that is superposition between 0 and 1, though. And that then you can pull up the triune. So I realized that, okay, how do you visually understand that? Well, when Roy showed me his triune system, I realized there it is, that a paradox is also a triune. It's not just two things. Paradox is not just about duality, it's about triality, because you have an intersecting point between the two sides, right? So it's almost like the human consciousness does this. You have a circle, but which is infinity, represents all of existence and all of everything, but you can't perceive it. So what does it do? What does it do? It turns it into a duality. It's just a circle that's twisted, the Mobius strip, right? But we know that duality is really, it's one thing, and we just can't encompass it. That's why the paradox is a boundary between perception and conception. So then I looked at the triune, and then I looked at Daniel's spiral. I met Daniel first, and his spiral is literally starting to understand how infinity develops, infinities within infinities, and we really only need a few levels to truly for us to truly reach the next singularity, or to create the next level. See, it's almost like consciousness generates more levels infinitely, right? So if you want to pull up that chart again.
Oh yeah, I got you. No. It's as somebody that perhaps one of the longest, strongest held identities I've had was game. I really like a lot of stuff you're saying right now, because it's like, oh God, we're playing the ultimate game. Oh, sorry. There we go.
Yeah. We're talking about, this is truly infinite. We're true. So what this triune does, and you'll see, I've created a couple of things at the very top that you need to observe. It's very important.
Yeah.
So the observer, that's you looking at this triune system. Simplicity and complexity, right? People are always fighting over that. You have the esoteric East, right? Buddhism, Hinduism, it's all nothingness, it's all simple. And then you have the Western world who want to understand and have the proof, and it's all complex. And then you have the actuality, which is that it's a superposition between both simplicity and complicity. So if you understand that going in, that you don't have to look at it from one perspective or another. Don't say, no, it's got to be physics-based or it's got to be consciousness-based. No, it's both, because consciousness does generate physics, or physics does, they're interchangeable in a way. So that's the observe, that's the key piece of information. Then the key underneath, axiom, paradox, and truth. So if you want to reach the truth without questioning it anymore, to get out of the infinite regress of how do you know that truth is true, right? Well, then you have to see it as a triune system. You have to understand that, well, in order to understand truth in the middle, how to achieve it, is you're going to have to use what is simple, which is the axiom. An axiom is very simple. It's the simplest thing. Like I said, the human eye, its purpose is to see. Its purpose has nothing to do with seeing itself. It's a simple axiom. Or logic, it's an axiom. Then you have like 1 + 1 = 2. It's the simplest thing. Then a paradox is where complexity comes in, because you're like, well, I understand, but I don't understand. Wow, what's going on here, right? So if you superimpose the two, if you use paradoxes to achieve axioms, then emerges the truth in the middle. Okay, so ultimately, you need a linguistic translation of these abstract concepts. Okay, that's why I have in the table here religious, scientific / philosophical translation. Okay, so because a theory of everything is not just a consciousness-based theory, it's not just a physics-based theory. It is a theory of everything. It is necessarily a theory of everything. It has to render everything compatible, from religion, whatever people say in religion, whatever people say in science and philosophy, all of linguistics. Take what's his face, Wittgenstein. Like everything has to fit into everything always. So how do you do that? How do you wrap everything into everything so that you can see everything? Right? This is what this is meant to do. You can start simple, which is the zero at the top, the tau or the pleroma, right? The fullness, the zero, the potential, right? So the red is ultimately what I call the function. So that is the thing we're trying to talk. But the green is the definition, the name we give it. Because again, we function through dualities. So everything collapses in this table. You see the zero and potential. You see the name of that zero, and we've named it potential. Pure chaos. It's been named many different things, God, energy, whatever. So there's a duality within that monism, within the idea. That's the axiom, the zero potential. That's really just, you could just stop there if you're one of those simple guys and you're just like, that's it, that's all I want to think about or not think about. But if you want to return to the zero, if you want to go through a process to understand that zero or to feel like you have that truth, you've grasped it, and there's no doubts in your mind anymore, well, this is what this pathway does. You just go down that triune and you start to understand that everything collapses onto itself. Everything's a reflection of itself, not only vertically, but horizontally, right? The I am thinking, for example, right? Identity, being, and thought, they all collapse. Like you can like fold them onto the middle column. Both columns fold inwards onto the middle column. They're both the same thing, right? So when you're talking about positive and negative, when they cancel each other out and they're both really zero, that actually distributes itself throughout the whole of reality. Okay, and the whole of reality, we only have 9 levels around where we can choose. It's arbitrary. This is where I spoke to Tyler Goldstein the other day, and he concurs with Daniel as well. They both concur that it doesn't really matter which levels. Like I left out molecules, for example, in this table. That's not one of the levels, but it doesn't really matter which ones you leave out or which ones you include, because there's an infinite amount of levels between each level that we see. So between atoms and molecules, there's an infinite amount of levels. We just haven't found them yet. We were in fact, we would generate them. If we look for it, we will generate it, because that's what consciousness does. It generates reality. Pretty mind-blowing.
Do you think now? Okay, now we're going to get very metaphysical here, because this is why I kind of stay on more of the. And again, I do believe you're kind of correct in the whole. A theory of everything makes people think, oh my God, we have everything. Whereas often when I hear it, and I don't like it being overused as much, I kind of agree with Professor Wolfram more of like, at least if you're talking like the physics-y side of things, we're looking for a fundamental theory of physics, and then you got to do the consciousness, and then you got to do all the other stuff on top of that. So even if you have a base cake, it ain't a cake yet. It's basically just, yeah, you got some risen batter and everything. You need all the other stuff that goes on the cake as well, and often there's layers to the cake. But okay, now I almost wonder if within that space, whether or not they may physically exist as what we understand to physically exist, what happens if what we're looking for is something that's generated by our mind itself? Kind of going into what you said, where, okay, maybe it's what happens if it's not necessarily in our physical plane that we could measure, but what happens if we start to code it onto a computer? If we are the ones that are creators and we're trying to get the computers to model things in our head, is that real? It seems pretty real.
Everything that is real by definition. But people don't accept that. They don't like to accept that. Because then it causes incoherence, right? Because if you don't have a set objective, like structure to determine what is true and untrue, and you say everything is true, then how do you organize society? How do you live your life, right? So it's both. It's always both. It's always paradoxical. Everything is true and everything is not true, or there are some truths and some falsehoods. It's both at the same time. It's always paradoxical from the highest point of view. Now, here's what's going to really blow your mind. I haven't even gotten into this because there is a whole video explaining this chart anyway. So if anyone's interested, they could go and do that. So I won't go through it unless you have any questions.
I'm going to toss the link in the doobly-doo. Or actually, it's in the chat right now.
But this is this chart, or this unity theory. What it does, it also explains the why. I know that's a big statement to say, but it's also the why. It explains the why. Yeah. Not just the how.
No.
And
How do we get to the why?
I'll explain how. Because once you find the truth, once you found how the mechanism that distributes throughout itself, it necessarily comes with its own purpose. It comes with its own purpose. It has to, because it's a true theory of everything. A true theory of everything is going to come with its own why. And not just that, it's a technology. It is practically applicable. You can apply the truth, there's the mechanism of truth. It is applicable. You can do science with it. You can do art with it. Now that's something that I'm keeping secret at the moment because a few reasons. But eventually I'm going to.
Okay. So we're going to need a part 2. Okay, I see what you did, sir. Well played. But okay, how about this? Can we get into the infinity limited equation? Because we were going a little over. I kind of want to just kind of delve into that and just kind of have you explain kind of your reasoning behind this. Because I had seen this and I'm like, I didn't really pay attention to it. I'm like, all right, there's a lot of confusing words that I don't understand and everything right now. And I meant to get back to it. And since I have the progenitor here, let's get into it. Oh, there we go. Boom. All right, let's bring this up here.
Okay.
All
right. So you look at the. We'll simplify it even further. Again, there's 2 equations, in fact. I don't know if you took that screenshot. There is another screenshot where I've put it against a black background.
Okay.
And
let me. I'll go to it.
Yeah.
It's probably easier.
Again, duality is always there.
Okay. Is it in the infinity limited video?
Yeah, it is. It's just you'll see the same equation, but you'll also see a simpler one. It's the infinity symbol next to the MT. I don't know if it's really necessary, but visually.
No, I'm coming to it right now. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was right before this. Stop that. Boom. And present. Boom. Okay. This guy? Is it further or later in the video?
It'll be a bit earlier. No, it's after. Sorry. Yeah. After the. Keep going. It's on a black background, so it's not on white. It's on a black background. Yeah. Keep going.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So one more time. Why is there something rather than nothing?
It's not
because nothing is something. It is everything. Right. Existence necessarily includes nothingness to be complete, and it does it through consciousness.
Go to your screenshot.
I just want it to be. Oh God, I should have. Okay, I'll just bring it up on the normal screen.
It might not.
Okay, I'm looking too far. I'm getting far too curious on this.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Monoaletheia.
So,
Greek for one truth or a single truth.
Yeah, that's monolithic.
I also like to see this MT as represented.
You want to start with that?
Yeah. So ultimately, the simplest way is infinity equals monoaletheia. That's Greek for single truth. That is the equation. But then people want to know how. That's where the complexity starts to come in. So now you can go to the screenshot.
All right. So go back. Boom. Boom. And boom. Okay. There we go.
Thanks for indulging me there.
No. That makes doing it in the steps. And again, if anyone hasn't watched the video, the link is in the description. But it's like, okay, the single truth infinity. That's a hard thing to argue with. So let's get into how it's adjacent or something too.
Okay. So ultimately, there's a couple of things. So you have infinity on the left, and then you have it. What does it equal? It equals at the very end the single truth. But how? How is this? It's the A plus So A is just the variable that I use. By the way, I'm not a mathematician. I was horrible at math when I was a kid. I could barely subtract and add. So, but you necessarily have to come up with some kind of visual manner, and I just felt like this was the best. Okay, so A represents existence. We defined that earlier. Then you have to add it to non-existence, right? You have to understand, like, how do they coexist somehow? Well, here's the thing. Non-existence, logically speaking, doesn't exist. That's the paradox. Because you're saying non-existence. So it exists through consciousness because you're generating it with the idea. So ultimately, it makes no sense. Like x at the end there, that is the variable for non-existence. That represents non-existence. But here's the thing. It's not necessarily non-existence because, again, like I said, non-existence doesn't exist. So it's an unknown variable. I like to keep it more specific. It's an unknown variable.
I remember you saying that. Yep, this is the unknown. Yep. Okay, yeah, that's the variable. Okay.
But unknown, by unknown, it's unknown to our perceptions. It is still known, still represents nothingness because it is still known through consciousness. We generate it. So that's why
Ken, we're trying to figure out what's going on with the infinity limited equation right here. That's what's going on. Yeah. Welcome, my friend.
So X ultimately is an unknown variable representing void. That's what I said. It's very specific. It's very important to understand that. Okay, so let's go back to existence. You have A. You start with what we know, what for sure it's, if you accept existence and logic, that's great.
So A, existence, and this is non-existence, and then we've got plus DT.
Yeah. So for intents and purposes, you say non-existence, but I just put you through
void. Okay, I apologize. Nothingness. There we go.
Well, it's unknown variable representing void. That's the specific way.
Words matter. No, I like it. No, specific works. Okay, cool.
And then so someone would ask, why don't you just put them together? Why don't you put existence plus non-existence? And the reason is because you want to respect logic. You want to respect human logic, like regular logic, so that you can eventually understand the paradoxical logic. So that's why, and existence or void doesn't exist logically, regular logically, in order to be added onto to begin with. Right? If you could add on to nothingness, it wouldn't be nothingness. It would be another existential thing. So that's why.
It would be something, yeah.
Yeah, so that's why X is on the other side of parallel with. That's the sign, the two bars, parallel with. There is an asymmetry that we will never be able to achieve. People will always look for it, but the infinity limited will help you realize you don't need to have the asymmetry, the touching nothingness. You won't need to do that. So that's why I've put existence plus the aletheia. That's the common denominator. That's us. That's the consciousness. The aletheia is a paradox, and a paradox is simply something that exists in consciousness. It doesn't exist anywhere else, really. I mean, right?
Okay. No, I'm getting the bit of your drive a bit more now. Okay.
Yeah. So the aletheia is two truths, right? It's a physical paradox. Two things existing at the same time, in the same place, in the same point. The absolute. So existence and non-existence existing together at the same point. Now, this point is not physical and it's not non-physical, but they both are. They're both parallel to each other. So that's why existence plus consciousness. This is the two things we know. That's all we know. And what we can't perceive for sure is nothingness. So that's why I have this equation. Now, what it is a paradox within a paradox within a paradox. Because you have the aletheia, which is the physical paradox, which is the experience in our consciousness, plus the existence that we are acquainted with, right? Out of which our human consciousness emerges. So we know those two things for sure. In parallel with what we are able to conceive, and I said you can't perceive it, but you can conceive nothingness. And so nothingness is a paradox. Existence and consciousness is a paradox, and that is a massive paradox in itself. That the brackets that brackets these symbols on the outside, that is an antinomy itself. So you have a aletheia, which is a paradox, a physical paradox, which resides within an antinomy, right? An antinomical paradox, which resides in the infinite. So infinity, I mean, out of infinity emerges us and everything, basically, just in that whole equation. Or are they mutually
I think you
describe
just
each
broke
other?
my brain. I'm just sitting here. I'm like, okay, we got a paradox within a paradox within a paradox, or at least adjacent to a paradox here. I'm like,
Because
crazy, but I could something like that working, because I'm just like, there are certain things that you're not supposed to go down to, but if you go down and you actually explore them, where might it
you
may
do.
lead?
Because here's the thing, like it's self-referential. Infinite regress, you'll never escape infinity. You'll never bracket it. But what you can do is go a few levels. So paradox, so 3 levels, right? Paradox within a paradox within a paradox. But those paradoxes, you have to make their content existence and non-existence, so that you can truly encompass infinity in your mind. Because you go 3 paradoxes and you realize, oh, even paradoxes are in, there's an infinite regress to paradoxes themselves, right? So you start to realize there's one massive paradox, and in fact it's not very paradoxical at all. It's just the truth, which is infinity. That's why, if you want to go down that road and break your brain, go for it. But ultimately, once you've thought about it enough, you'll have an experience. You'll experience it, and it won't break your brain anymore. When I see this, I see beauty. It's so comprehensive. It's so beautiful. It's so simple. It's infinity equals absolute truth, and this is how. Now the why only came through unity theory, which was afterwards, and that's a whole separate story.
When I see stuff like this, and your way of describing the infinity balanced with truth, but it is also adjacent to what we may conceptualize as a void. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I start going here. This is what starts popping into my mind. And I'm not sure if that was intended or not. I'm not sure if this happened to be a happy coincidence, but yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, it's the yin yang speaks to me as well. I really, it's a very accurate description. It's a physical, symbol that really describes
You could
infinity as well.
view one as something and nothing, or however you want to conceptualize it. But there is a connection there and everything. And I think there's probably a reason why that particular symbol has persisted and, I don't know, been around for so long, describing a whole lot of different stuff and things. And all I know is we've been going for about an hour and a half. I have a very minor additional okay, a little bit more than I understand, a little bit better now what you were saying, actually being able to speak with you. I would like to continue to speak with you, Daniel, and I need to get Roy on now at some point. But I, like you were saying, I'm hearing a lot of overlap between the different things that you have said, and even I had Brad from the Sonic Gravity podcast on, and just I'm learning all these different things, and this is the beautiful thing, because I took something Brad told me the other day. I'm like, why don't we just play around with this? I'm like, oh, this is a very interesting result, and I actually need to send it to him. I need to send him some clips from our talk before after this. But yeah, dude, this has been fascinating. And James, I'm going to give you the floor. The last couple of minutes, just let know what you're working on, what plans you may have coming up, and what you'd want folks to take away from this conversation. The floor is yours, sir.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. Thanks for letting me explain my theory a little bit more. It's nice to share it and have others share theirs with me and see how they're all compatible, because ultimately everything is. That's why I'm completely open to everyone, even when they disagree with me. It's kind of strange. I'm like, yeah, you do. So it's great. And I think what you asked, what my plans are. Ironically, now that I've been in Colombia, I'm sort of working on myself a lot more, and I'm having lots of crazy experiences. I haven't even gotten into the actual experience. I don't know if you saw Dune, but there's a scene in Dune when he's the main character's in the tent with his mother, and he's having these visions, and he's just he's going insane. I had that experience just a little while ago. Anyway, and this place is magical. Everyone's there's a lot of shamans here, a lot of super wise people, and they understand everything that our Toe community understands, and they've understood for thousands of years. I'm meeting indigenous people, and medicines and like rapé, kambo, ayahuasca, and all this. So I'm kind of going in that road, and so I haven't participated very much in toe recently, and I'm more experiencing things now, more than just trying to understand them logically and seeing what's going to happen there.
How dare you have a life outside the internet?
Yeah,
it's awesome, man. I know I'd sent you that message, and it feels good because every once in a while you're like, oh, this guy just moved and everything. Is he okay and everything? But that's great. You're getting out there. You're learning about different things. You're absorbing the culture and everything. And as long as you're getting something out of that, man, everything, just positivity. That's what I love, is the positivity and the whole even when you go on with Carter, you're like, I'm looking for consensus. I'm looking to help figure this out, because it's like, if we all have different pieces of the puzzle, let's see how these pieces can get together to form something, I don't know, useful.
Well, that's why I'm very thankful for you and grateful for you and Daniel and Roy and other people in the community who's reached out and that I've reached out to, because I'm a paradoxical guy, obviously. So I'm motivated and I'm not motivated at the same time. Like, once you understand things, you realize, okay, now I can live my life. The whole point for me to understand and to do all these theories of everything was just for me to figure out, where do I go? What's my purpose? But my purpose ended up being finding an answer to what purpose is, So, but now I feel like, cool, I found it. I'm comfortable with it. I can accept it. I can just live my life, find a wife, have kids, have experiences, smoke some pot. I don't know. So thank you. But at the same time, I would love for this to be my career. I would love to go and do TED Talks or write books and teach in university. I don't know, and work with people in the toe community. Maybe we can create a think tank. That's actually what we're doing right now. It's a think tank. So if anyone's interested, you want to join, you want to talk on the forum. Our website is unitytheory.online. Couldn't find the .org. It was taken, unfortunately. You want to participate in the forum there. And I mentioned really quickly that the Triune system has a why. It answers why of everything, not just the how. And that there's a technology. So we're going to be looking for people on every level: biologists, psychologists, artists, and so on. People who understand our three theories. There's going to be this whole process they have to go through. But if they start to talk on the forum, and we're going to pick out some people and do an interview, and if they want to enter the private forum it's called UTT, the Unity Theory Technology, we're going to create a think tank for that as well. So you're welcome to come.
You guys already got the website up and everything. That's awesome, man. I'm going to have to check it out, just because it's like, I feel like even from Daniel's conversation, I'm like, oh my God, that's a better way of compartmentalizing things to not make my brain explode. And that's something very useful after talking games, just because my mind is kind of blown. I'm not exactly sure how it's blown, but I just know that it's being blown in certain, and I would like more. But we've been going on for over an hour and a half, so I tossed the link there in the chat. I'll try to remember to toss in the doobly-doo below. But James, hey, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to try to keep doing some more of these things. Just hit me up if you want to have a chat or anything about some other things. Got a question? Cool.
Yeah. I want to talk more. I want to interview you as well. I want to get more personal, ask you questions about where you're coming from and all that. So that would be great. Again, thanks for the opportunity. This has been the most fun interview I've done ever, I think, probably. So because I've really got
like I said, just low key, relax, and let the person just share their thoughts. If I may agree, I may disagree, and every once in a while, my mind just kind of goes, and I'm just like, ooh. What should I follow up with?
Do you like turtles?
That is also one of my default questions there. If somebody likes turtles, we're usually onto a good place. But hey, peace out, everybody. Thank you all for watching. James's links to different things are in the doobly-doo. Peace out. Take care of yourselves. And hey, apparently the truth is out there. So stay safe, everyone.
Have you guys checked out the Memes of Destruction's channel? He's an interesting dude. I like him.